Warning, these practices may change your life and your destiny. Proceed with caution. I'd like you to take a moment and think about all of the roles and identities that you have in your present day. And let's just keep it focused on your present day, your average day. Hi, I am so and so. I am a blank. Or I am so and so's blank. I am a spouse. I am a girlfriend, a boyfriend, they, not otherwise specified, a partner, a whatever it is. And then ideally, you would write this in your journal, all of the roles that you identify with: teacher, boss, student, employee. And depending on where you're starting from, so some of you are starting in a nightmare. So your only role might just be targeted individual, TI. And that's okay. We'll work from there. Others of you might be in a different position where you're wanting to shift into a different destiny line, your purpose, your highest path. Maybe something isn't really working the way you want it to in your marriage, in your career, in your life, whatever it is, right? And so we want to establish the baseline of your roles and identities. And then depending on your starting point, we want to identify where you are powerless. So that's if you're in the nightmare, versus where you are comfortable and complacent. Because very often what happens is that when you are trying to make a life path shift, and I'm not talking about shifting into another version of your life where you just have more abundance. I'm talking about really, really taking a left turn or a nosedive into a completely different field, something that maybe you've always been called to do, but have never had the guts to do it, or have never seen the opportunity or the doorways flag you down. And so as a result, you've never really pursued it. Let's say you've always wanted to be a singer or be in a band. Then you are waiting for these opportunities which never come because you are still stuck in a paradigm of your old roles and identities. So by identifying where you're at in the present moment versus where you want to go, then we can start to see where you're comfortable and where you are complacent. And so take a moment, if you will, if you're feeling active, and not everybody will be, so you can save the video for later, but take a moment and write down all of the roles that immediately come to your mind and identify the ones where you feel powerless versus powerful. Usually I don't like to do binary dualism, but this is important. Powerless versus powerful versus complacent and comfortable, contrasted with bold and in the unknown or unfamiliar. And the way I would approach this exercise is by starting with all of the roles that I could think of, and then by going back through and identifying the qualities that I would associate with them. And when I've done this exercise, I actually did a little bit of a different variation where I identified my emotional connectivity. So I was trying to center in the heart space versus my egoic satisfaction versus my head space versus my spiritual space. And so I was able to hone in on where I wanted to go and shift into based on the factors that I wanted to prioritize. So I wanted to be heart-centered, I wanted to be spiritually embodied, and I also wanted to use my intellect. But where I was most uncomfortable at that time was teaching about exactly what I'm doing now. literally, like I have gone through this practice. It has taken years, but It is very fulfilling, and it's a little of an advanced practice, but you are more than welcome to do it. So essentially what you want to do is you want to identify where you are stuck versus where you want to grow into. And if you are in the nightmare realms, then you're not going to be able to get to some of these more advanced directives of this exercise, which is why I want you to journal it so you can track your progress over time. Because when you're not so focused on surviving, staying alive, and getting out, then you can start to focus on, the luxury things like finding something that really lights you up and that you're really passionate about and that you would really enjoy from a heart center that would also help to share your gifts with the world. So this is where it helps if we're working one-on-one, because I can help you through different phases and make it a little more specific to you. So once you've done that, I want you to now listen with this in mind, which is to really shift into a reality, a new reality. You have to be able to shift your roles and identities. And if you cannot do that, then this whole conversation is moot. And if you are only stuck in one role that is disempowered or is complacent, and you have no other roles that you want to try to grow into, meaning you have no goals, then you are essentially demonstrating what psychologists will call is learned helplessness. And this recording and the subsequent recordings are not going to be to your benefit. And do not book a session with me, because it's not gonna go well. I promise you. So it's really important to understand that when you are shifting destiny lines, especially when you're taking hard left turns, your role and identity has to be fluid. And we have upcoming talks where we're going to talk about being in flow and some of these practices. Right now, I want to give you the theory behind it, because you will have some innate archetypes within you that'll come out to play when you start doing reality shifting that need to be recognized and normalized. Because if you try to suppress it, and if you're not in flow, or if you're just rigidly holding on to being a targeted individual, a disempowered one at that, where there's no way out and you're stuck in a hole, then that's the conversation's over, right? So we have to open the mind to be able to see that we have options, and that we have to harness ourselves through those options. And so, for example, what I did when I was doing some heavy reality shifting is, for me, and this is kind of an advanced topic, but anchoring into a sanity archetype was critical for me to keep my shit together. And so, for example, being a teacher, falling back to being a teacher was one way that I was able to navigate through some really dicey scenarios. And I did that as a fallback, where literally I tapped into some future timelines. Let me just give you a concrete example. I tapped into some future timelines where there was some advanced technology that militaries were using, the military industrial complex. I didn't have that term at that time, but there were companies, corporations, and also militaries that were interested in virtual reality biotechnology. And they had interfacing, interlinking, or interlacing, I'm not sure the correct terminology, because this isn't something that I could Google, right? They had a way to access me and my body. And one way that I was able to keep my sanity through that is that I developed a training program for them. And then I could shift out of that reality layer if it didn't feel safe. Remember, the body always knows. I could shift away from that by completing the project. And so when you have an anchoring archetype that has a baseline tethering to your actual identity and something that is innate within you, like maybe you're a healer, maybe you are naturally a mystic, maybe you're an investigator. All of these natural tendencies can save your sanity when you are starting to do some heavy, heavy quantum traveling. Because when you start opening up to the world of reality shifting and quantum traveling, you start working with different timelines and different narratives that exceed everybody's wildest imagination. And you tap into thousands of years into the future in some cases. I'm not even joking. Thousands of years. And the world is so different there. Technology is so different. And the people that you correspond with, that you have access to, have varying levels of patience or impatience for your ability to keep your shit together or not. Like it's just, it's kind of like you get to the red line in the White House, right? But not in your time point. You get to the president on his special line, and he or she or they answer the phone, and you have 30 seconds to communicate with him. You need to have your shit together if you are going to get on telephone lines like that, right? And so by having an anchoring persona that'll carry you through no matter where you pop into or the conditions that you pop into, it allows you to complete the cycle or to complete the project and move on, or to forge new connections and certain partnerships or collaborations, especially if you are trying to navigate out of a nightmare type of situation. This is one approach that I used. Once I realized that I had actual sentient beings in parallel timelines on the phone, then I started creating partnerships. So alternatively, what you'll find is that you'll be able to access different versions of you in parallel worlds. This is why I said this isn't for those that are just trying to upgrade their lives. Like this is for people that are really doing some heavy, heavy reality shifting and quantum traveling, because the world is not as we were taught. It's so much more fascinating. It's so much more interesting. And so if you can ride the bull and hang on, then you can go through many different rodeos. And it's really exciting. I have to say, it's really exciting. So by understanding who you are innately, and Carl Jung, I believe, was referencing this in his work, not that he was talking about reality shifting or quantum traveling, but he really broached this idea that we have an archetype in us. We actually have several archetypes in us. And these archetypes come in with certain roles that we play out karmically. This is what I believe. It's like we have a template inside. Everybody has their own template, but mostly they're kind of shared between humans, between like 12 different templates. And that's where we get into like astrology and personality characteristics. And it's much more complex than that in actuality. But for an unconscious society, it's like babies are born with a little template inside, and then they become adults that start to express that template against their will when they're unconscious, and then to their benefit and to their will when they are conscious and they start creating themselves. So part of the consciousness expansion journey is self-creation, you becoming like a masterpiece. But you can harness this idea that Jung was talking about, that you have an archetype inside you that will help you keep your shit together because it's always helped you keep your shit together. And by identifying what that archetype is and what that role is, and it's already present in your life, so you already have it on paper in your journal, then what you can do is you can create that consciously as a continuing thread. So if you ever start to get into reality layers that you're about to lose your shit in, and there are some of those out there, then you can fall back on that. And then by understanding where you get hung up, like I had a martyr archetype that was like, lamb to the slaughter, sign me up, like, come on. Like endlessly, it was just kind of absurd. And it's literally in my human design, which I'm not a big fan of, but it's literally like an archetype that other systems of roles and identity identifiers have pegged me as the martyr. And I'm like, yes, I see that. I worked really hard to change that. And so then by understanding where you get hung up or where your nightmare creation begins or where it's headed, then you can start to break out of it. It's a way to look at something like a strategic map or a blueprint on a piece of paper, and then to tweak it and decide and say, you know what, I'm going to try out a different role, something I've never done before. I'm going to try to be a creator. And there are no limits to being a creator, right? Or are there? I don't know. That's still a question mark for me. But Abraham Hicks and others say that there's no limit. So let's try it out. Okay, can I create worlds? Well, if I can, then can I shift into them? And what does that look like? And then, so you start to build this map. And this is where we work together in coaching. If you feel called for that, if we both feel called for that, actually. Sorry. You can't help everybody. Through this process, I found it's just, it's a little complicated. So you can create this strategic map that then go on to build KPIs. It's a business term, key performance indicators. And we're going to talk more about that in future recordings because it's really, really important. These are like signposts and mile markers for how your creations are coming into effect. And I'm just using the creator role as my personal example because that is a path that I took because I found that to be most empowering. It was like, oh, I can create worlds, maybe. Well, I can definitely create my life. Like that's a given, right? And so then how far can I stretch it? Can I create societies? Can I create technology? Can I create connections? Like, then you get to explore. And part of that exploration process is by getting feedback from the reality that's actually manifesting around you through KPIs or signpost. And so once you have the understanding of who you are in today's metrics, then you can set stretch points for yourself. Like, I want to try out being a scientist. I want to try out being a consciousness scientist. I want to try out being an artist. These are actual things that I did. I want to try out being a composer, a musician, a poet. How does it feel? I want to, try out being a quantum traveler. And so then you shift yourself from this complacent, familiar, or powerless person into this actively creating and exploring persona that harnesses the power of your gifts and who you are, right? We don't want to look at what you have down on the paper and say, that's all shit, let's just throw it out. No, we want to understand how it uniquely drives you and motivates you, and then how you can grow from that point. So today I heard from somebody that identifies as a sister, and her relationship with being a sister was one of being very oppressed because her brother, apparently, this is horrific, and this is like one thread of her story that was so, wow, I can't even believe that she is still so strong. I mean, it's just incredible, right? But she was trafficked by her brother. And so she associates that role of being a sister with being powerless, in addition to other roles too. And so we want to understand how you have created situations in your life to play the part of being abused, a victim, or powerless. You see, we don't want to victim shame and take that away from anybody, but we want to shift the thought from how did I create a situation in my life where I tried on that role because I don't want to try on that role anymore. And see, now all of a sudden it's like recognizing it as a role, recognizing it as an identity, and now from the position of a creator, of a self-creator, recognizing it as an option. Because what happens is that we get stuck, and she's not stuck anymore. She's moving beyond it, right? But when you're in it and you're stuck, it seems like it's hopeless. And I was stuck for a very long time. Very, very, very long time. So, I mean, it's its own process of getting unstuck. But when you start to get unstuck, you can take a step back and you can see this was a role, a part in somebody else's play that I don't want to play anymore. I don't want to participate anymore. And so just by saying that and asserting that, you then create the energy of options. And that's what we want to tap into. So if you look at your list and you see all of these roles that you feel oppressed or victimized or powerless, then it's really, really important to identify an alternative option. And for me, that was being a creator. It was also being a teacher. I couldn't just jump to being a creator because I couldn't believe it, and this is another important part that we'll talk about continuously. Your belief system is also really important to understand and identify, because you have to gently extend your belief system. You can't just wake up one day and say, I'm going to create a totally new life for myself, and then believe it. You have to navigate your way out by using breadcrumbs or by stepstoning your manifestations. And so having a continuous thread of an identity or an archetype helps with that as well. Because once you have your baseline archetype, for me, it was a teacher. And okay, so I have some people in different timelines that are accessing my body in really weird ways, and it makes me uncomfortable and it freaks me out and it frightens me. Now, I could have gotten lost in that fear, or I could have developed training programs with a start and an end and a request for payment. And if I didn't get payment or acknowledgement, then I deemed those partnerships unfair and violations. And then I dealt with them differently than partnerships where there was reciprocity. And so it gives you a framework for which you can navigate out of some tricky situations. And likewise, it gives you the opportunity to get closer to an opportunity or a new manifestation, really, by understanding where you're comfortable and where you can stretch. Like, for example, let's say that you've always wanted to do acting or stand-up comedy, but you can't just wake up one day and jump to the stage, right? So you might tap into the fact that you are a supporter or you are a promoter, and you might start going to events and offering services. You might, like offer stagehand services or offer promotional services, or you might just go and visit some of those events and just spectate for a while. And so then you slowly get more comfortable and you slowly start participating in a way that you are stretching yourself, with ultimately the goal of being at an endpoint that you're working towards. But if you're just blithely going about your life, dreaming, from the armchair and not strategically planning it or moving in that direction, then the universe is not going to be able to respond in kind to bring you opportunities that would lead you to that endpoint. And then this practice, being cognizant of these roles and identities, helps you to filter those in your life who are in alignment with you. And this is another really important part of catalyzing your manifestations that we'll talk about in upcoming recordings. But essentially, you need to be able to closely identify with those who can help to lead you or propel you in the directions that you're trying to go. And when we don't understand our roles, when we don't understand our identities, then we just kind of go through life hanging out with the same people, doing the same things, and then wondering why our life doesn't change, right? And so we need to open up ourselves to networking and introducing ourselves as different people, or by setting our sights on meeting people who have the roles or identities that we're trying to grow into, because they can be door openers, they can be mentors, they can be coaches, they can be business partners. But if we're just mindlessly not taking stock or inventory of the people that we're drawing into our life, then we're never able to actually figure out who's really in alignment with us and where we're going. You see how one is kind of stagnant and kind of fixed, like you build this web around you, and everybody sees you as, let's say, whoever you introduce yourself as the most. Everybody sees you as so-and-so's blank. Everybody sees you as the blank. You build this web around you, and the universe has no mobility because you define yourself by those roles, and everybody that you have in your circle sees you as that role, treats you as that role, and then expects you to be that role. And then so you can never really break away until you become cognizant of this. And so how would you ever invite anybody into your life that sees you as a stand-up comedian if you never make any jokes? And you know what I mean? And so like if you're trying to get to a different life path, it's never going to work unless you really, really practice different roles, stretching yourself beyond identities that you've associated yourself with. And then that opens up new avenues for people to come and build a different section of the web with you, or to build a new web entirely. And so if you're interested in some of these practices or working with me one-on-one intensively, I do it via WhatsApp asynchronously with voice messages. And I really love the deep dives, working with just a couple of clients on a weekly basis where we go back and forth a couple times a day. I overwhelm you. We get really into your psychology, really into your narratives, and then we understand how to shift your life. If you're interested in that, then email me, reach out to me. My link is in the bio.